I'm Richard from Photonics, and welcome to the third in our series of LED grow light technology videos. Now, the last two videos have been quite heavy on the technology, so I thought I'd do something a little bit lighter and more entertaining today. So we're going to be taking a look at a bunch of Chinese-made LED grow lights listed for sale on Amazon. Now, the reason I'm doing this is that a lot of people buy these lights. I hope you won't be one of them, but at least this way you'll understand what you're getting. And the claims made for them are extremely misleading. But if you look through the listing carefully and use some of the knowledge that we've got from the first two videos, and we'll learn a bit more today as well, you can actually get some idea of what you're getting for your money. And there are several different ways that LED grow lights can be rated. Now, the first one is a fantasy figure. They just go, hey, what should we call this? Let's say it's a 1,000-watt LED grow light. Completely meaningless, it's a headline figure to try and get people to buy them. The second one is HPS equivalency. Now, most people know that a 600-watt HPS light will cover about 1 square meter, more if you're doing something like growing lettuces, which doesn't have flowering or fruiting. And so they'll say this light replaces a 400 or a 600 or a 1,000-watt HPS. The third and fourth methods of doing it are either the actual draw of the LEDs themselves, so 100-watt LED, or mains draw. Now, the difference between the two of them is with LED draw, it's how much the LEDs are drawing. Wall draw is how much the whole light is drawing. Now, between the wall and the LEDs, you've got the power supplies. And the power supplies are not 100% efficient, so if you're drawing 100 watts at the wall, you're getting about 90 watts through to the LEDs. And those are basically the only legitimate ways of rating it. Now, they will generally speaking give you some idea of the area that you should be looking at using it in, and they'll also usually give you two figures, one for vegetative growth like lettuces or something along those lines, and a second smaller one for flowering and fruiting. Now, given all the information that's in there, you can usually work things out and decide what they genuinely like. The feedback is surprisingly not very helpful, and I'll explain that at the end of the video. So without further ado, let's take a closer look at the first of our Chinese lights. Now, one thing I want to make plain beforehand is I'm not picking on any particular brands. I'm not saying that these brands are any worse or any better than any of the grow lights on Amazon. I've simply picked some of the bigger selling ones that seem most popular and just chose those because if other people are buying them, then someone who's watching my video might be tempted to go out and buy one as well. So I figured those were the best ones to go with. So let's go take a look at what we've got. Okay, so let's take a look at our first light. It's the Flies-On 600-watt LED plant grow light. Comes with some accessories. And yes, it's 600 watts. It has 60 pieces of 10-watt LEDs. Now, that sounds impressive, especially for only $78.99. That's pounds. If you're in America watching this, it'll set you back $89.99. Okay, and this is actually Amazon's choice. Wow, that's a pretty big endorsement. And let's see what we're getting for the money. Now, let's see. No reflector, no danger, as we're looking for technical details. Okay, right. Here we go. Compared to HPS or metal halide, this 600-watt LED grow light replaces a 400-watt HPS while consuming only 108 watts. Okay, so it's a 108-watt light, not a 600-watt. Well, actually, it's not, because as I pointed out at the beginning of the video, this is actually wall draw. This is what the whole light consumes, including the power supplies. So knock 10% off of that, and you're basically down to about 98 watts. And that's about the most it can be, and I'll explain why later. Okay, so we've gone from 600 to 400 to 108 to about 98 watts. So, and they even really sort of acknowledge that it's nowhere near 400 watt because it says it's perfect for a 2 foot by 2 foot growing area. That is 60 by 60 centimeters, which is 1/3 of a square meter. Okay, so basically you'd need 3 of these lights to do a square meter. or 1 square yard. So definitely not equal to a 400 watt HPS. Now let's see what we can work out about the LEDs a bit more. Now we know it's got 60 LEDs and it's drawing about 98 watts. So if we bring up the calculator here, it's 98 watts divided by 60 LEDs and we get 1.63 watts. Now if you watched the second video, and if you haven't, go watch it, you'll know that the average red LED probably puts it about 1.4, 1.6 watts, and then you've got your blues and that a bit more. So basically these LEDs appear to be much more like a 3 watt LED than a 10 watt LED. And there's a slight clue somewhere else about what these things are. Up here, they've got a picture, and included in that picture is this, which is one of their LED drivers. Now the last line on here, I mean, that is a really crap looking LED driver. If you know what good ones look like, then you realize just how dire that is. It's about a quarter, an eighth the size of a proper power supply of that power. But anyway, you'll notice on the bottom line it says constant current 600 milliamps. Well, again from the second video, you know that 1 watt LEDs draw 350 milliamps and 3 watt LEDs draw 700 milliamps. And this is putting out 600 milliamps. So the dual chip LEDs that they're so proud of and calling 10 watt LEDs are actually 2 1 watt chips wired together and being run at less power than a 3 watt LED would be, 600 milliamps, in order to stop them from melting, which is very, very different from, oh, it's a 10 watt super bright LED. So not a very good example of good quality, honesty, or anything else. So the feedback on here is interesting. Now remember I said that I'd explain why you can't really trust feedback. Well, this one perfectly demonstrates that a lot of the feedback is fake. Now we know now that it's a 98 watt light, so let's go down to here. Okay, the reviewer here is Kate Ross. Now she says that she purchased this light for 6 plants in a 5 foot by 5 foot tent. Now a 5 foot by 5 foot tent works out at 2¼ meters square. Now we know from the first video that you need about 250 to 300 watts of high quality LED per square meter. So this works out at over 600 watts. Now one of the things I didn't mention at the beginning of this video is that this is a dual spectrum, or this review is this is a dual spectrum light. Now the way these work, and I'll show you in another light later on, is you've got a vegging setting, a flowering setting, each one with a switch, and basically each spectrum switches off half of the LEDs. If you put it in vegging, you really only get the blue LEDs, and if you put it in flowering, you get the red. So most people ignore that and just switch them both on. Now we already know that this thing's less than 100 watts, and by putting it in vegging, you're only going to be getting half of that, so less than 50, just under 50 watts. Now she said that she vegetated just using the veg button, and the plants grew huge and bushy. Now there is absolutely no way under any circumstances that 50 watts in a 2¼ meter 5 by 5 tent is going to do anything other than die. So this is very, very, very obviously a fake review. And that's one of the reasons why you can't trust reviews. We'll mention some more about that later. Right, next up is the Viper Spectra Reflector Series 450 watt LED grow light. Viper Spectra, one of the biggest players on Amazon in the budget LED grow light market, so that's why I chose them. Now this one, as you can see, is a dual spectrum light. It's got separate switches on it for veg and bloom. Unfortunately, the spectrums are completely useless. Here they have them, and that is essentially completely blue. You put a light under that, put a plant under that, and it's going to die or just sit there. It will not grow because it needs a balanced spectrum. Exactly the same thing for the flowering spectrum here. You can see it's completely lacking in blue, so the plants are going to stretch like mad. The only way to actually use this light is with both of the switches on, so you get all of the LEDs on at the same time. That kind of defeats the purpose of having dual spectrum. Little blurb for my company in here. Plant Photonics was actually the first company in the world to put switch selectable dual spectrum on, and interestingly enough, about 6 months after that, the Chinese companies started doing it as well. However, we do it a bit differently. We actually have extra LEDs. If you put on vegging, extra blue LEDs come on and some of the red LEDs shut off. If you go to flowering mode, some of the blue LEDs shut off and extra red LEDs come on. That means if you have a 100-watt Plant Photonics light, you always get 100 watts no matter which spectrum you're in. Anyway, back to this light. It says it compares to a traditional 400-watt HPS while consuming 200 watts. So, as you know from the last LED, you've got about 180 watts of LED power. Now, the interesting thing here is the coverage, 24 by 24, which is 60 by 60 centimeters, or 1/3 of a square meter. So, remember, you're going to be using 200 watts, which is the mains draw. That would mean that you're using 3 of these lights to replace a 600-watt HPS in a 1 meter square grow tent. So you're using 600 watts of LED power instead of 600 watts of HPS. That kind of also gets around the whole benefit of having LED lights in that they should consume less power. What this shows is the LEDs are not very good quality. You're not going to save anything, and quite frankly, you're better off with HPS because you can change the bulbs in that, whereas this thing is going to die in about a year, so stick with HPS. One last thing, going down to the specifications down here, is they say they're 5-watt LEDs. Now, we just worked out that you're talking 180 watts of LED power, and it's got 90 LEDs in there, so that's 2 watts each. And we also know from the second video where you looked at the power consumption of different colored LEDs, that's about what you would expect from a 50-50 mix of 3-watt LEDs. So these are not 5-watt LEDs, they're 3-watt LEDs. So all in all, you're not saving in electricity, and they're being a little bit misleading in the listing. Right, now we're going to look at a light by Mars Hydro. Mars Hydro is a big player in the budget grow light market. This is the Mars Hydro 600-watt light. Now, I'll keep it fairly short. If you go down, it says it's 272 watts at the wall. Okay, and the coverage is 2 feet by 2.5 feet, which is roughly, I put that in and came out with half a square meter. Okay, so basically you're looking at 544 watts to replace a 600-watt HPS, and in all honesty, I rather doubt it's going to replace that 600-watt very well. And one thing I wanted to show you down here is at least they put in both the 110, 120 volt, they put in the current that it draws. Now, this is quite useful. Some companies don't do this, and at least they're now specifying exactly what the power draw of them is. However, if you come across a light that doesn't actually specify what their wattage is, doesn't give you any information at all, sometimes down here they actually tell you the power consumption. It's a legal requirement to have it somewhere on the light anyway. Sometimes you can see it in a picture of the light, sometimes they put it down here. So for example, you've got down here, it works out at about 278 watts. Let's do a quick check on this, and you've got 220 volts at 1.23, and you get 270. They claim here it's 272, but you get 270.6. So that is quite useful to help you understand what the actual light might be like if they don't give the genuine power consumption rating. Now, this next one gets my award for the greatest exaggeration of any listing that I've seen so far. That's why I've really included this. This just absolutely is amazing. And It's also done something I really didn't expect. It has completely stumped me as to what type of LEDs they are actually using. I thought I'd seen every single type of LED made anywhere at any time in the last 12 years and even longer, but I can't identify these, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So anyway, 600 watt LED grow light by a company called Go To Top. They didn't even bother like coming up with a decent name. Now, 600 watt LED grow light, and there's no actual usable information in here, so we go down to product details down here, and we find power 600 watt, actual power 60 watt. So, and it's got 60 LEDs. Now, remember, 60 watts times 0.9 to give us the actual LED power, and we've got 54 watts. Now if we divide that by 60 LEDs, it comes out as 0.9 of a watt. Now the interesting thing is that's a bit, well, that's actually a 1 watt LED maybe, but the thing is they're double chip LEDs. So like the last one, they took 2 1 watt LEDs to sort of make a 3 watt LED. But this one's using something to make a 0.9 of a watt LED, 2 of them. So they're not even the chips from a proper lighting class LED. They are some kind of, and let's see if we can see a picture in here anywhere of the actual LEDs. No, you can't. The chips are too small to actually be able to see it. But these are like 1/2 watt chips. So they appear to be ones from large indicator LEDs that they've actually put in trying to use for lighting. Now, so the 600 watt LED is actually only a 54 watt LED. So that's definitely the biggest exaggeration on power. They also say that it's got a coverage area of 1 square meter. No. So all in all, this is probably shows you just how misleading these things can be. And there's a question from a customer here, and the answer is hilarious. On the specs, it's say actual power 60 watt. So is the light in fact actually only 60 watts? The reply, no, it's 600 watts, but it only uses 60 watts power consumption. It only uses the same power as a 60 watt light bulb. And that's actually by a customer. Ah, dear. So with a more than 10 times exaggeration, this one definitely wins my award for the biggest exaggeration. And I really would love to know what those mystery LEDs are. Never seen anything like that before. Right, let's go to the next one. Right, so let's look at another light. Now this one's a bit different from the other ones that we've looked at. This is a cob light, as you can see from here. And also unusually, it gives you a much better idea of what's inside of it. It's using a Cree CBX3590 cob light. Those can run up to actually about 130 watts. They say 120 here, but it's actually a bit higher than that. Although you don't want to run them that high, they get hot and they're not as efficient. So yeah, Cree LED, and down here they actually show the other components. The main one here is the power supply. That's a Meanwell. They're extremely good power supplies, and that is actually one of their higher grade models. So quite a big difference, as you can see. That's only a little less than half of the size of the power supply, and much better than the little plastic black box you saw in one of the other lights. So definitely an improvement. Now they give the power output, again they say 200 watts, and you've got 2 of these cob LEDs in them, so that's perfectly believable. And they also, 7.5 square feet is about 2/3 of a square meter. So that goes with what we learned in the first video, that you need about 300 watts per square meter. So far it's looking pretty good. Now, if we go down, you see the actual, here's the current and the voltage. Now this is actually the LED power rather than the wall power.
So we can work that out. It's 36 times 5.2, and we get 187 watts. That's the actual lead power. And at the wall, about 200 watts. I'd say it's probably actually going to read a little bit higher than that. So all in all, for once, we don't have any exaggeration. We don't have any mystery components. And guess what? It's a lot more expensive. Yeah, now that is the sort of price that you would be looking to pay for a decent 200 watt light. And I guess this really goes to show the old saying is correct: you get what you pay for.
Well, I hope you found that interesting and informative. It certainly should give you some pause for thought if you've been thinking about buying any of the less expensive LED grow lights from Amazon. As we've seen, the most accurate reporting, apart from the expensive light, was exaggerating by 100%. They basically doubled the power. The worst one actually exaggerated the power by over 10 times. So not really what you'd call accurate. Remember to look at the core coverage, which is also the flowering coverage. That is going to be the most accurate area and most accurate indicator of what the light will actually do. Most companies don't want to exaggerate that too much, because if they do, they're going to wind up with a lot of very unhappy customers and bad feedback. Now, speaking about feedback, I did mention that it's not reliable, and you're probably wondering why. Well, the answer is that most of the 4- and 5-star feedbacks are left by people who haven't actually tried the light yet. They've ordered it, it's turned up, they've plugged it in and left something like, got the light today after only 2 days, nice shipping, plugged it in, looks really bright, excellent, 5 stars. They haven't actually tried it. Also, of course, they haven't got any experience to compare it with. It's highly unlikely that they have much experience growing with LEDs, and certainly not with anything high quality. It's a bit like giving someone who's only ever ridden a horse a Trabant. They think it was wonderful. Of course, it was the worst car ever produced in human history. It's actually made out of paper, but anyway. So people don't have anything to judge against. Your feedback, 1- or 2-star feedbacks, are generally from people who've actually tried the lights, and then you'll see comments like, there's no way this replaces a 400 HPS. There's also, and I really emphasize this, a lot of scary feedback of lights that have actually burst into flames. And in some cases just the LED's burning out, but in other cases, according to the customer, they have actually caught fire, which is not something you want. So before you buy any light, please take a look at all the feedback and use your common sense. People who aren't commenting on how the plants grow, disregard the feedback, they just received the light, and take a look at the 1- and 2-star feedbacks, because that will alert you to any safety concerns. Another thing that's almost universal on these is they're very noisy. They use a lot of small, high-speed fans to try and keep the thing from melting. I mean, most of these lights are actually very small considering the power ratings on them. And I mean the genuine power rating, not the fantasy one. And in order to keep them cool, especially since they're mounted in a box, it takes a lot of fan power, and they are very noisy. Think small, cheap hairdryer on turbo mode, and you won't be far off. I've had people comparing them to living by an airport with jets taking off. So even the Mars Hydro actually was the only one that listed the sound level, and that's 56 decibels, which is actually quite loud. It's the equivalent of a fairly loud room full of people talking. It's loud conversational level, or above even street traffic noise level. So not something you really want operating in your bedroom. So all in all, we've learned several lessons. You have to really read between the lines. And the other thing is, you do get what you pay for. And if you're going to fork out for an LED grow light, I would strongly advise you to get something that's high quality, as high quality as you can possibly afford. You're better off buying one really good light, using it for a few months or a few grow cycles, and then buying a second really good quality grow light to cover the rest of your area. So I really hope you've learned something from here. I hope it'll save you money and help you avoid making a terrible mistake. As always, please subscribe, please like the video, and please leave some comments. I would really like to hear your thoughts on these videos and what you'd like me to do next. Okay, so from Richard from Plant Photonics, goodbye and happy growing.